Hello and welcome to The Wrap, WRAL's weekly politics podcast. I am your host this week, WRAL State Government Will Doran, and I am here with my colleague Paul Spey. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
It was a very busy week in state politics this week. We were both down at the legislature a lot, but it wasn't just the legislature that was keeping folks busy. I was in court on Thursday. There was a big hearing in one of the gerrymandering cases, there's a case that is arguing that the state constitution guarantees the right to fair elections. The Republican legislature says, no, it doesn't. There's no such right to fair elections in the state constitution, and therefore this case needs to be thrown out. The suit is being brought by Bob Orr, who's a former Republican Supreme Court justice here in North Carolina, but he's kind of publicly split from the party, has become a critic in the past, and is now fighting against GOP control with these new maps they have that will give Republicans pretty solid majorities in the legislature and the U.S. House delegation, even if Democrats were to win a majority of the statewide vote. And so he's saying the game is rigged, the deck is stacked. What is the point of having our elections if one side can put its finger on the scale so much? And the Republican response is, well, the state Supreme Court just last year ruled that partisan gerrymandering is okay, and so that shuts the door on that argument. So we will see what the judges do in that. That is a three-judge panel that was handpicked by Supreme Court Chief Justice Paul Newby to hear that case. So, you never know how these things will go, but, the Supreme Court can, leave its imprint on these three-judge panels even when it's not directly involved.
It definitely seems like one of the cases in politics where there's a disconnect between what the letter of the law might say in a document somewhere, and then what most people think should happen. Because when Democrats had control of the state legislature, the Republicans were on the other side of this argument saying, hey, wait a minute, suing the Democrats for gerrymandering districts back, before 2010.
Exactly. Phil Berger, the state Senate leader, when he was in the minority, when Democrats had control, filed a bill for redistricting reform to take it out of the legislature's hands. The Democrats at the time killed that, wouldn't let it pass. Now the Democrats are in the majority. I remember this was a few years ago. A couple of them filed literally the verbatim exact same bill that Berger had filed back, a decade or 15 years earlier. And of course, it went nowhere. It got killed. So this is, it's all just about power.
Yep.
And it will continue to be so. Republicans have a supermajority right now. The maps look like it'll give them a pretty decent chance of keeping their supermajorities this year. Although, there are some competitive seats, particularly in the state House maps, that Democrats do have a shot of flipping and could potentially end that supermajority. But what are they doing with that supermajority, you ask right now? That's a great question, Andy.
That's right. Yes, please answer my questions, Will.
This week, we saw the legislature move forward with the final version of the masks in public / crackdown on protesters / reform campaign finance laws bill.
And yes, they are all, one and the same effort.
Right,
and
just throw all of that into the same bill.
Again, another case where there's a disconnect between how people might think politics work and how it actually works. One bill does not stay the same from its introduction to the end, and it can be tweaked multiple times. You can take stuff out and throw stuff in, and next thing you know, there are three different topics in here.
Yeah, so this started out as really an effort to crack down on protests, and especially the campus protests that we've seen recently in favor of the Palestinian cause in Gaza. A lot of those protesters have been wearing keffiyehs around their face or regular masks. Some of them say it's to protect themselves against the spread of COVID. Critics say they're just trying to hide their identity from the cops who are coming in to bust these protests up. So the legislature passed this law to basically amp up the criminal penalties for anyone who commits a crime while wearing a mask. And, that could apply to bank robbers, but it also could apply to, a college student who's convicted of trespassing or littering or, any of the other crimes, that could go along with the protest. Along the way, the state Senate changed that bill to ban anyone in North Carolina from wearing a face mask in public for health reasons, which was something that we put in place during COVID for obvious reasons.
We should say that for a long time, masks have been banned in public for a long time, with a few exceptions. One of those exceptions was for COVID back in 2020. They added it,
Yeah.
And so that exception has been there. It's been allowed, so to speak, and then they wanted to basically take that back out. Let's take that back out of the law, that exception right back out of the mask ban.
Yes, and I mentioned just a moment ago that there are some competitive seats in the State House. Well, several of the members in those competitive seats, including Aaron Paré here in Southwest Wake County, said, whoa, hold on a second. What are we doing here? This is the kind of thing that, is probably not great politics to do in an election year. And, also just, there were legitimate concerns. Hey, so you've got someone who is immunocompromised, and we're telling them that they can't take steps to try to protect their own health. They're, said in addition to those practical concerns, let's think about the politics of this.
Right.
Doing this a couple months before the election.
And I imagine her district has a lot more moderate Republicans too, who are, not quite the social conservatives, but want, less government involved in their lives, and may be surprised to see, what they interpret as a restriction on mask wearing in public. And she's expressed these points herself, actually. Erin Paré has, the Republican legislator.
Spoken with a few of us. She's been on WRAL a few times talking about this, and they were successful in that. They got it changed to basically they kind of tweaked the current rules to make it a little stricter. So you have to wear medical grade masks for when you're in public, so that you can't put a T-shirt over your face or something like that. But that passed with also the campaign finance rules that Democrats have really protested against. That would basically let super PACs give money directly to the state political parties, which could then funnel them along to individual candidates, which is obviously a massive loophole around our current laws that ban, corporations from giving to candidates, because corporations can give to super PACs. So it's kind of, they wouldn't be able still to directly give money, but, you could pretty easily funnel it through if you'd like to.
Funnel, launder, If, of course, Democrats have protested it, they could also benefit from it. We should point out, both sides stand to benefit from having more money. And our gubernatorial race is expected to be probably the most expensive in the country.
Yes, certainly the most watched gubernatorial race in the country, because a lot of states don't even have their race for governor in the same year as a presidential election. So we're kind of already an outlier in that regard. And then on top of that, I think we're the only, swing state that's doing that also has an open seat without the incumbent running. So, these national groups raise tens of millions of dollars for gubernatorial races, and we're kind of the big prize. So, expect huge spending in that race.
And that's right. Cooper is termed out. Governor Roy Cooper is termed out. So it's Attorney General Josh Stein for the Democrats and Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson for the Republicans.
Yep. Meanwhile, we've talked about this the past couple of weeks on the podcast, but the budget talks at the legislature seem to be just really falling apart. Very public drama between House Speaker Tim Moore and Senate Leader Phil Berger.
That's right. And we should point out that's inter-party fighting. Or is it intra? I don't know the words. But it's only Republicans fighting amongst themselves in this case. Democrats have little to no influence over the budget whatsoever. They might get a few favors here and there in whatever's passed eventually. But Speaker Moore and Phil Berger don't seem to be close on terms, as they say in the sports world.
No. The House has always been a little bit more interested in spending money than the Senate has, but it seems that this year they are much more interested in spending money than the Senate is. Berger has told us reporters that he's fine with not doing anything with this $1 billion surplus that we have this year, just walking away and letting that all roll into savings. There's a big concern, of course, over childcare.
That's what I was going to bring up. That's something that we've reported on a lot here at WRAL, not just the politics team, but other reporters here at the station, just because it's so pervasive. If people can't find childcare, then they can't work, or they have to find a job that where they work from home. It just disrupts people's lives and can impact the economy if people can't find someone to watch their kids for the day.
Yeah, it's tough. Both you and I have young kids, and it can be really hard, even when they're, out for a day or two being sick, let alone, if people's daycares are going to shut down. There have been reports that say, maybe even as much as a third of the daycares in North Carolina could close down if there's not some help from the state government to replace the federal money that's going away. And, that could be thousands of people. And, there's already months-long wait lists to get into daycares, even with the system as it currently is. Now you take away a third of those daycares, or even even if it's only 10% of the daycares, I mean, that's going to blow up those wait lists for everybody. So
right. And so you have Speaker Moore said in his gaggle with reporters this week saying, hey, we're going to make an effort to fund some of these child care facilities. He didn't give a specific number. The budget comes out. The House proposal comes out next week. And so we'll see what his proposal is there for child care. But Berger has not expressed any interest in sort of bailing them out.
No. And I mean, he's been consistent, not just on this issue, but with a lot of other things, saying, yes, we have this surplus, but that's a one-time only thing. That's not guaranteed to exist forever. And I don't want to tie a one-time surplus into recurring funding that's going to keep coming back every year because, accurately, the federal government is shutting down this funding, which is causing all of this concern. So if the state government were to start funding it and then a few years down the road decide to shut it down, it would just start this whole thing over again.
Right.
So, it's a complicated situation. We do have this $1 billion budget surplus, but a lot of disagreement on how or even whether to spend that. But it wasn't all fighting at the legislature this week. There were big bipartisan votes on a few things. They voted to ban these things called, the critics say, are gas station heroin. You've probably seen them as like diet pills or mood enhancers. It's this drug that's actually used in plenty of other countries as an antidepressant for medical use. But here in the U.S., it is not approved. It is not regulated, and it can, just be sold to children at your local gas station. And state lawmakers have a lot of problems with that, and so they are going to make it a Schedule II drug, which is the same as like cocaine, and meth, and opium, and all those much harder drugs.
That's right. They one of the few times, I think it was a unanimous vote, right? Like in the House at least, no one voted against it. And then afterward, a few of the Republicans and Democrats held a press conference, and a couple of them were pretty serious in reflecting on some of the testimonies they'd heard from victims' families. They said, hey, we've had people reach out to us and say, they have a son or a daughter or a relative who's ruined their life. They've ruined their lives with gas station heroin, and that might seem foreign to us. I had never heard of it, but apparently it's a real deal. And they said I think 18 other states have some form of ban on those products. So they expect to take it, the Senate to take it up and send it to Cooper sometime later this year.
Yeah, and I think that will probably move pretty quickly because we saw the Senate actually, I was following a different bill that they amended to also put this same ban into. So that kind of says, well, now we've got two different shots at making this thing illegal. Even if one of these bills somehow doesn't pass, the other one could. So it seems that there is some effort to make that happen. There were also big bipartisan, I believe unanimous votes on new bills to crack down on predatory towing with companies by basically creating this like statewide commission that would regulate towing companies and set some limits on how much they can charge people. Lawmakers were telling stories from their constituents. One woman apparently had to pay like $3,500 after her truck got towed. Some semi-truck driver ended up having to pay $15,000.
This is more than my car's worth.
Right?
Even the $3,000 one.
So, that's moving forward in the House. I don't know if it necessarily has a shot in the Senate, but it had a ton of support in the House. As well, similar crackdown on predatory roofers. We've all heard about these scams after a big hurricane or a hailstorm or whatever. These kind of fly-by-night operations. Swing by, offer to fix up your roof for you, take some money in advance, and then never show up again.
Ghost you.
And so there's also some efforts to crack down on those folks as well. And then there's also a kind of surprising one on Gen X or PFAS, those chemicals, those forever chemicals that people have heard about. There's a company, Chemours, that was secretly dumping these into the Cape Fear River for years and years and years. Finally got caught, but all the local governments from basically Fayetteville down to Wilmington had to pay to upgrade their water systems now that they knew that these chemicals were in their drinking water. These are things that, critics say have been linked to cancer and birth defects and really serious issues. There's a bill that would make the companies pay for those costs of cleaning up the drinking water. Got a pretty good reception in the House. Historically, the Senate has always been a little bit more skeptical of
New regulations.
And specifically on this PFAS issue of really just kind of doing much to address it. So we'll see if that moves forward in the Senate, but it does seem to have some legs in the House. So, some bipartisan action in addition to all the partisan fighting. But let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and talk about the elections that are heating up. Stay with us. And we are back here on The Wrap. I am Will Doran, WRAL State Government Reporter, talking about the legislature, as we mentioned earlier, with the big budget fights. Senator Berger has told us that he wants to be basically done in 2 weeks. End of June, he said, whether there's a budget or not, just get it adjourned, maybe come back for skeleton sessions. But really, it seems that, if you're looking for a bill to get passed and it doesn't happen in the next couple of weeks, you're going to have an uphill battle on that. So we're going to see a lot of action, I think, probably at the legislature through the end of June to really make a final push on some big, important issues for folks. There could be some constitutional amendments put on the ballot. Senator Berger told us that he was looking at a few options. He declined to say exactly which, but a dark money group that is often closely associated with Berger recently put out a poll that outlined a few of the options for anyone who might want some insight in what they're looking at. This would include extending the terms of state Supreme Court justices from 8 to 12 years. That would obviously help the GOP keep their current majority on the court. Looking at a proposal to keep immigrants banned from voting in North Carolina, which has been introduced in both the Senate and the House, is backed by House Speaker Tim Moore. State Constitution already does this. This would just make some changes minorly to the wording of how the Constitution does this, keep it exactly the same. Critics say it's just a political play. Supporters say it's needed to show their support for the concept of citizens voting. So that could be one that goes ahead. We could see efforts to further cap the income tax rate. That was we in 2018 had a amendment to cap the income tax rate that is the subject of an ongoing lawsuit. There's apparently a push to further cap the income tax rate. That is one of the other amendments they're putting forward. There's a few others on that list. Those are some of the more notable ones. Also, a push to repeal the state's racist and unenforceable literacy requirement rules for voting. Those obviously have been on since the Jim Crow era. We still have them in our Constitution. We tried to get rid of them once in the 70s. Voters voted to keep those, and it was a bit embarrassing for politicians at the time to be defeated that publicly on that touchy of an issue. No one has ever tried to bring it back up really seriously since then, just with that bad taste from the 70s still in their mouth. This poll found that there were still a very large percentage of people who would favor keeping those in the Constitution. Maybe not a majority, but it could be close. So I don't know if that would get on the ballot or not, but that is something that Berger has talked about in the past, so we will see. Some other things as we get ready for the elections this fall. We are still waiting on the Board of Elections to decide if RFK Jr., Cornel West, and the Constitution Party can get on the ballot for the presidential race here. We are also expecting that decision by the end of June, so stay tuned on that. We had the start of ads in the governor's race 2 weeks ago, and then this week we saw Josh Stein hammering Mark Robinson on birth control issues. Obviously, his first ads were on abortion. Now he is talking about birth control. Robinson had spoken at a rally in Tennessee held by an anti-birth control group. Stein says if he is elected governor, that shows that birth control would be at risk here in North Carolina. The legislature, with Robinson's help, could take steps to ban birth control. I talked to Robinson's campaign. They say that is not the case and that he supports continued access to birth control despite speaking at this rally held by this anti-birth control group. So clearly, Dems think that talking about women's issues and reproductive health and privacy issues is going to be a winning issue for them in this election. Republicans try to dismiss those claims, but you're seeing it not just at the state level in this governor's race, but even at the national level in the U.S. Senate, which Democrats control. We've seen recent votes to protect birth control access, which Republicans voted against, vote to protect IVF, which Republicans voted against. Now, Republicans, including our own Tom Tillis here in North Carolina and Ted Budd, say that these are just political stunts and they don't want to give Democrats any sort of benefit of the doubt on these, and it's not real serious bills, and so they say no one should take their votes against it too seriously. Democrats, of course, say people should take their votes against birth control and IVF very seriously. So we're going to see a lot more of this, probably from the U.S. Senate, just as we've been seeing from the state legislature here, which is under Republican control, a lot of focus on immigration issues because polling shows that is a good issue for Republicans. So, as both the Congress and the state legislature wrap up this summer, look for a lot of messaging bills on key issues that folks think are going to be important to voters, and stay tuned for more on what we see from the legislature. There's, like I said, there are 2 weeks left. We could still see some big things moving in the final coming days here that have not yet been shown to the public, including the new state budget proposal from House Republicans, which we are expecting early next week. So maybe Monday night, Tuesday morning, something along those lines. We could get a first look at what they want to do with that $1 billion surplus. So until then, thanks for listening. This is Will Doran for Paul Spey, WRAL. Talk to you next time.